An interesting game for the Hoosiers on Saturday against Ohio State. The defense made a big statement, answered so many questions about them, while the offense did far from that and left us wondering about their outlook for the season.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Monday. Happy Labor Day, everybody. You are Locked On Hoosiers, the one and only daily IU podcast. We are part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Appreciate you guys making us your first listen, wherever that may be from, especially on a Monday, a holiday Monday, Labor Day. As always, sorry, I'm your host, Jacob Rude. Was trying to go over my notes because there's a lot I want to talk about today. Before we do that, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5, get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. There are two very different paths that you could take after this game, I think, for the Indiana Hoosiers. The defense looked so good, and it such an elite opponent, something I'm going to mention a number of times, probably throughout this week, that I think you could very easily be optimistic moving forward into this season, which is maybe slightly, very slightly where I lean right now. The defense, that's going to be our first talking point here in just a second, could not have been more impressed considering how much turnover they had, how many questions there were, just a superb performance from them. At the same time, there are still a lot of questions about this team, almost all of those being on the offensive end, where I could not have been less impressed with what they did offensively in that contest. But again, it's important to note, it's important to add the caveat whenever you're discussing this, this was an elite opponent. The scoreline never really was going to matter. And this 23-3 is the final. It was always going to be kind of the process and how things played out throughout the contest. That's going to be their second toughest opponent this season, Ohio State. And I know that they didn't look great on the day, but they're still a supremely talented team. Having said that, that's part of why the defense looking as good as they did was my biggest takeaway from this game, and what I want to talk about first. That was a top opponent. That was the best wide receivers this defense is going to face this season. That might be the best backfield, one of the best backfields they're going to face this season as well. Trevion Henderson, Mayan Williams, Diamante Trayanum, all three starter quality Big Ten backs that Indiana largely kept in check. The ground game is where I thought Ohio State hurt the Hoosiers the most. But overall, to come out of this game giving up, quote-unquote, only 380 yards is better than I could have predicted for this team. Held them to 2 of 12 on third downs. Now they were 2 of 3 on fourth downs. It was realistically as good, no, better than you could have expected this defense to play. They're still figuring things out. There's still so many new players. There were players that they mentioned on Saturday that I didn't know. Full disclosure, I didn't know every player that they mentioned on Saturday, and that was always going to be the case because you bring in so many new faces with so many roles open. There were always going to be surprises that got onto the field, and yet through all of that, they still looked fantastic throughout this game. There were some struggles maybe early on, but in the middle chunk of this game, I thought that they were fantastic. They kept Indiana in this game. They gave the Hoosiers a chance offensively, and we're going to talk about the offense a lot in the second and third segments, but they gave the Hoosiers a chance, and I didn't think that was going to be possible in this game. So I am thoroughly impressed with them. I want to talk about every level of the defense. Defensive line, Andre Carter, real deal. He is absolutely as advertised. He looked absolutely fantastic for the Hoosiers. Finished with 4 tackles, 2 of those for loss, broke up a pass. He was so good in this game. I'm super excited to see what he's going to do for the Hoosiers moving forward this year, because this is one of the best defensive linemen Indiana's had in a long time. We kind of mentioned that during the preseason, during fall camp. Indiana hasn't had a ton of really good linemen, really any, in the last decade plus. He's already one of those guys, I think, and I'm really excited. He's an all Big Ten caliber player, and we mentioned that during the preseason. He has that type of ability, and he's going to be fantastic this season. But overall, that defensive line was able to create pressure up front without needing to always blitz. And again, considering it was Ohio State and how talented their offensive line is, that was very encouraging. The linebackers, Aaron Casey was a stud in this contest. Jacob Magnum-Farrar was terrific as well, stepping in as a starter. Linnell Carr had a couple moments, Miles Jackson as well, but I thought Casey and Magnum-Farrar were 2 of IU's best players in this one. And Casey was one of the guys that we knew was going to be back, voted as a captain. I thought it was going to be really important for him to be a leader of this defense, and through one game, absolutely looks fit for it. Him and Andre Carter, I think, are going to be the 2 leaders of this defense, and they both looked fantastic. The secondary, though, might be the biggest surprise. It probably is the biggest surprise for me from this game. I thought it was going to be ugly. You had the wide receivers that Ohio State does, obviously, in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Egbuka. And I thought they were primed to have a huge game. You had an IU secondary that we didn't even know what it was going to look like. There was no indication of what that secondary was going to look like. And yet, the secondary more than held up in this game. Marvin Harrison Jr., 2 receptions, 18 yards. Emeka Egbuka, 3 receptions, 16 yards. If you'd have told me those 2 had 34 total yards at the end of the game, I would have thought Ohio State scored so many points early on that they didn't even play the full game, which was not the case. So they were absolutely fantastic. Indiana had a lot of bodies that they could put out there in the secondary, which ended up helping because they had a number of injuries to the secondary. It allowed them to endure that a bit. There were a number of standouts, I thought, from the secondary. Kobe Minor was 3rd on the team in tackles. I thought he looked very good in that regard. Lewis Moore was very good as well. He had 6 tackles, all of them solo tackles. Both Minor and Moore had pass breakups. Philip Dunham had the interception on the day, a great play, although it was a terrible decision by McCord. It was a great play to step up and make that interception. Nicholas Toomer, another guy who I thought tackled extremely well in this one. Noah Pierre had a big play. I think he had a tackle for loss in this one out of that Husky position. There's still room to improve, but overall that defense was so much better than I could have expected in this contest, and that's what gives me optimism moving forward. The problem that you're going to have, and it's a problem we've seen for many years, and the concern you would have about this is the defense ran out of gas. They, in the second half, started to slow down a little bit. They couldn't keep up with Ohio State for as long anymore. And the end result was Ohio State pulling away at the end. Ohio State won the possession battle, just shy of 32 minutes to Indiana's 28. So it is Ohio State. You're not going to have that often, but that's a concern you have, is that if the offense is going to be as anemic as it was, your defense is going to be out there for a lot of plays, and they're going to wear down. And that's been the case the last 2 seasons, and that cannot be the case this season, or we're going to run into the same issues once again. But through one game, against one of the best teams they're going to face. The offense looked incredible. The defense looked incredible. The offense, far from it. Let's talk about what happened with them. Let's talk about the quarterback specifically, because we didn't learn a whole lot about the two quarterbacks in this one. Before we do that, Athletic Brewing is one of the sponsors of today's episode. Now time for your Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing. Much like Aaron Casey, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. Casey was all over the field for the Hoosiers in this one. Easy selection for Game Changer of the Week. Led the team in tackles, 11 of them. Had a tackle for loss, couple of huge stops on third downs. Big plays for the Hoosiers throughout this contest. Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. Their brews are great tasting, award-winning, and beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. This is the Tropical Sour. I very much recommend it. Fantastic tasting beer, non-alcoholic beer. So first-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your online order at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. College football season is here, and this season Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Live each and every Friday. They will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College football kickoff live. We'll cover playoff implications, conference rivalry games, go in-depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff live every Friday, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. on any of the Locked On College YouTube channels. You won't want to miss it. Quarterback battle came into this one. We thought we knew who the starter was going to be, and it turns out Tom Allen just did not pick a starter during fall camp. He fooled us a little bit, or lied, depending on how you want to interpret it, and said that they had picked a starter about 10 days before the game. That wasn't true. They named a plan. Brendan Sorsby was a starter in this one. Both guys were going to play. Sorsby started this week. Tayven's going to start next week. They're going to reevaluate after 2 weeks and move forward from there. What's the old saying? If you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. That's kind of what this one felt like. The conservative play calling was certainly one of the most notable parts of this. IU wanted to shorten the game, which is fine, understandable considering their situation and who they were going up against. But when you play like that, you want to shorten the game and take advantage of opportunities. IU just kind of wanted to shorten the game. They didn't really ever look to take advantage of any opportunities. It seemed like they just wanted to shorten the game to lose by less. And so they were way too conservative in this one. They went 24 minutes roughly without a completed pass, which I think is the stat that really, if I had to pick one about the offense, that describes it most. Was that a game plan for the Ohio State game? Or is that what this team's going to look like moving forward? That's kind of what we have to decipher over the next week, because that was not good. That was nothing about that was really good. What I would say is this absolutely looks like an offense built for Dexter Williams. So if anything, my main takeaway from this game is that both of these guys are placeholders for when Dexter Williams shows up. Let's start with Brendan Sorsby. He started the game. I was impressed with his athleticism. He is a fluid athlete. He's more physically capable of playing in an option than I thought he would be able to. The problem was he didn't look natural playing in an option. One of the very first plays of the game, he seemed to be overthinking whether I pitch, whether I cut inside, and it ended up in a big loss on maybe the very first play of the game. And it's probably not a surprise that he didn't really play a lot after that first drive. It was the first play of the game. Rush right for a 2-yard loss. He stayed in for that series. I believe he stayed in for the next series. And then Tayven came in and he played for a good long while. On Sorsby, though, what I would say is it's very clear he's the better passer of the two, which, again, I think we knew that coming into this. The question would be, how much does that matter being the better passer in an option-heavy offense? If IU's going to open up the game plan more and allow them to throw more, that matters. If they're going to run the ball as much as they did on Saturday, that doesn't really matter. Ultimately, IU threw the ball 21 times and ran the ball 33 times. And of those 21 passes, I would say half of them came in the fourth quarter. So if IU's going to have it that distorted, I don't know that Sorsby's the guy you go with, because in talking about Tayven, he looked far more natural in the option, which makes sense. That's what he ran at Center Grove, I believe. That's an offense he looked far more comfortable in from the get-go. He stepped onto the field. He looked more comfortable running the option. And if that's IU's game plan, I think he's your guy. Now, he had struggles throwing the ball. I thought some of that was lack of chemistry and lack of communication, but some of that was just he didn't put the ball where it needed to be. It's hard to judge him a whole lot from that because he only attempted 5 passes, and he had the longest completion of the day to Cam Camper, his only completion of the day. It felt like he was probably better overall, but it's really slim margins. Sorsby came back in the game late, and then they weren't really running the option. They were opening it up for him and letting him throw the ball, which he looked far better at, not surprisingly. The end result is I don't know anything more really about this quarterback competition than when I went into the game. If you're going to run the option as much as they did on Saturday, I think you go with Tayven, you stick with him, and you let him play it out. If you're going to open it up a little bit more, as you did with Sorsby at the end of the game, you go with him because he's able to throw the ball and become more of a threat in that regard. Again, ultimately, the overwhelming feeling I have coming out of this game is these guys are placeholders for Dexter Williams. And so who would you rather have as a placeholder? Tayven, who is going to play probably more similarly to Dexter out of those two, or Sorsby, who potentially you could open up the offense more and maybe have the chance for more explosive plays. That's probably a decision they're going to have to make after these 2 games. It's going to be a lot easier against Indiana State, but coming out of this one, I don't really know that there is either guy that established themselves. I wasn't really impressed with either guy. I can understand why a decision wasn't made, but ultimately I don't like playing 2 quarterbacks. You can kind of get away with it in these 2 games because realistically, you were probably never going to win the Ohio State game, and you're probably going to beat Indiana State pretty easily. So those are 2 games you can get away with it in, but I don't love the approach. If I had to pick right now, again, I'm leaning slightly towards Tayven, but it depends on what this offense wants to do moving forward. Tom Allen made some remarks that he thought that they should have opened up the passing game a little bit more in this one. If that's the case, then you probably go with Sorsby, but it's going to depend on what this offense wants to be moving forward. Does it want to be an offense that is just holding steady until Dexter Williams returns? Dexter Williams was on the field in uniform pregame. Tom Allen said he wasn't even going to dress, and he was dressing. We've heard multiple times that he's ahead of schedule in his rehab. How much longer do we have to wait until Dexter Williams is back? Is it only going to be 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks before he's back? If that's the case, do you just kind of try to hold steady through non-conference play, bring Dexter Williams back, and go from there? I'm not sure. It's an interesting situation they have. I think we certainly need more time to see these guys in action, but I don't love having 2 quarterbacks because, as I said, then you have no quarterbacks, and that's what it feels like Indiana has right now. Let's talk the rest of the offense, the non-quarterback portion of the offense in this one. There were some positives, I think, outside of the quarterback position. I want to touch on a couple of them here in a minute. Let's talk about today's sponsor that we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Now, outside of the quarterback position, I think there were positives to take away from this game. At the top, the fact we haven't mentioned the offensive line 20-some minutes into this podcast is a huge, huge good thing. Huge bonus, hugely important, drastically improved from the last two seasons. They weren't perfect, but they weren't just turnstiles. And that's the bar we have to measure on. There were very few times, I thought, when the line broke down. There were times, and again, you're going against an Ohio State team that one of the toughest defenses you're going to play this season. But I thought the line held up well, and especially with how much they ran the ball. They were able to open up some holes, and I think the problem with IU's running game was not that the offensive line wasn't opening up holes. It's that Ohio State realized pretty early on they're just not going to throw the ball. So they loaded up on the run. Again, this comes against an elite opponent, and you held up. And I think that's one of the biggest positives. You move forward into games where against Indiana State and some of these non-conference games, I have a lot more optimism about what this offensive line can do. But the fact we didn't mention them and being awful in the first 20 minutes of this podcast, I think says a lot about how good they were. I went through most of the game not thinking about the offensive line. And that is such a drastic change from the last two seasons that alone, I think, is a huge positive. Jalen Lucas certainly was a lot more involved in this one. Had 11 carries for 24 yards. Much more of a workload. He was running in between tackles. He was trying to get to the edge. He caught one pass, wasn't really used as a receiver. And if IU's offense is going to look like this, I don't know why you would line him up in the slot. Like, I guess just keep him in the backfield and keep him as a threat there, because IU's offense doesn't have creativity really to it. It's just a very straightforward triple option right now. So there wasn't the creativity, but the ball was in his hands a lot. And I think that was good. Now, there were concerns about if his body would be able to hold up. He struggled with injury. I'm hoping it's just cramping. They mentioned it was cramping during the game. I'm hoping that's all it was. Seemed like it was really hot on the field. So he was appropriately involved. I still would be fine if he did it a little bit more, but appropriately involved in this one. And I think against worse teams, he's going to have big games. He's going to be able to get to the edge, which he couldn't really do in this one. He's going to break out for big gains. And I think he'll have some big games in this season. It's just kind of a struggle early on, expectedly, for Jalen. But overall, I was fine with how he was used. I mean, how dangerous did he was kickoffs? And he had one punt return that was pretty good, but the kickoffs, he looked absolutely dangerous. I'm going to be really interested to see how teams continue to approach kicking the ball to him this season, because it seems like any chance he gets the ball on a kick or punt return, it could be a touchdown. Christian Turner, another pleasant surprise in this one, led the team in rushing yards, albeit only 29, but Kind of the third name in the running back room. It's been Jalen Lucas. It's been Josh Henderson because he was a returner. Christian Turner, though, he looked really good, I thought. Really strong runner. Found the gaps running between the tackles. Had IU's biggest gain of the day at 11 yards. So I thought he ran the ball really well and gives IU another option, especially if they're going to do this triple option approach. They're going to need a number of running backs. Christian Turner, I thought, was really good and absolutely fits in with this offense and gives them another weapon to use in the backfield. Hard to really have any thoughts or takeaways about the wide receivers because they had very few chances to really even make plays. Cam Camper looked fine. He had the one big catch from Tayven Jackson in this one for 24 yards, finished with 3 catches for 35 yards. EJ Williams had a 19-yard reception. DeQuise Carter had a 16-yard reception. Donovan McCauley had 1 catch. He had 1 miscommunication with Tayven. I don't know who that's on. It looked like Tayven made the right read and Donovan McCauley didn't, but I'm just a guy sitting in an office watching this game. I'm not in those rooms, but overall, I don't really have any takes about the wide receivers because they just didn't really get opportunities in this one. So hopefully they're able to open things up a little bit more and get those opportunities. My real only takeaway is that Cam Camper looked fine, and that's going to be important for IU's offense. Still a lot to talk about. I want to discuss more about the offense and the quarterback position moving forward this week. We'll do plenty of that. Plus, we have our recruiting show on Wednesday. But thanks again, guys, for making us your first listen. Everydayers, be sure to check in throughout the week. We'll have some more talk about IU's offense. Let me know what you guys want to talk about, what your takeaways from this game are down below. We'll have the recruiting show, preview show, all that as normal this week. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at @LO_Hoosiers. Subscribe to the podcast, whether on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes. Leave those ratings and review. It helps us out a ton. Most importantly, though, guys, I hope everybody has a safe and fun Labor Day. Hope your week goes well. And as always, LEO.